The day Katherine Foster turned 18, her father assigned her to break 3 wild mustangs before supper, while her 4 brothers sat on the porch rail drinking lemonade their mother had made before she died. That was 5 years ago, back in 1878, and nothing had changed except the calluses on Catherine's hands had grown thicker and the light in her eyes had grown dimmer. Now, in the sweltering summer of 1883, Catherine stood in the barn of their ranch just outside Elko, Nevada, mucking out stalls while the morning sun blazed through the gaps in the wooden slats. Sweat dripped down her spine, soaking through the rough cotton of her work shirt. Through the open barn door, she could see her brothers, James, Robert, Thomas, and William, aged 20 to 26, sitting in the shade playing cards and passing around a bottle of whiskey, despite the early hour. "Catherine!" Her father's voice boomed across the yard. "Those stalls better be clean before you start on the laundry, and the fence in the south pasture needs mending. Get to it." She leaned on her pitchfork, closing her eyes briefly. 23 years old, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd sat down during daylight hours. Her father, George Foster, had decided long ago that raising sons meant letting them become men through leisure and observation, while his only daughter needed to learn her place through endless labor. He claimed it would make her a good wife someday, though he never let her leave the ranch long enough to meet anyone who might marry her. "Yes, sir," she called back, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like an old friend. She finished the stalls, hauled water from the well, scrubbed her brother's shirts and trousers on the washboard until her knuckles bled, hung everything to dry, then gathered her tools for the fence repair. The walk to the south pasture took 20 minutes in the heat, and by the time she arrived, her canteen was already half empty. The fence damage was worse than her father had described. At least 30 feet of posts needed replacing, and the wire had snapped in multiple places. This was a 2-person job, maybe 3. She set down her tools and got to work anyway. She was digging out the 3rd post when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Catherine looked up, shading her eyes against the brutal sun, and saw a rider coming across the open range. As he drew closer, she could make out a tall man on a paint horse, sitting easy in the saddle like he'd been born there. He wore a dusty black hat, and even from a distance she could see the red bandana around his neck. The rider slowed as he approached, then stopped his horse a respectful distance away. "Afternoon, miss," he said, tipping his hat. "Saw you working out here alone. That's a big job for one person in this heat." Catherine straightened, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. Now that he was closer, she could see he was young, probably around her own age, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was sun-bronzed and honest, with strong features that might have been carved from the Nevada mountains themselves. "I manage," she said, returning to her digging. She'd learned long ago not to encourage conversation with strangers. Her father would have her hide if he thought she was being familiar with passing cowboys. "I'm sure you do," the man said, dismounting. "But that doesn't mean you should have to. Name's Yates Brennan. I'm headed into Elko looking for work. Wouldn't mind lending a hand here first if you're willing to accept help." Catherine paused, studying him. There was something different about Yates Brennan, something in the gentle way he spoke and the concern in his eyes that she wasn't accustomed to seeing, especially not from men. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "Don't need to know someone to see they could use help," Yates replied simply. He tied his horse to a remaining fence post and rolled up his sleeves. "Besides, my mama raised me to be useful. Can't ride past a lady working herself to exhaustion without offering assistance." Before she could protest, he'd picked up the second shovel from her pile of tools and started digging out the next damaged post. He worked with the efficient movements of someone who'd done hard labor his whole life, but there was a smoothness to it, an absence of resentment that Catherine found herself watching despite her intention to ignore him. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the bite of shovels into hard earth and the occasional snort from Yates's horse. Catherine found herself stealing glances at this stranger who'd appeared like something out of a dream she didn't know she'd been having. His shoulders were broad under his worn work shirt, and the muscles in his forearms flexed as he lifted the heavy posts. "You live around here?" Yates asked eventually, setting a new post and packing dirt around its base. "Foster Ranch," Katherine said, gesturing vaguely northward. "My father's place. He usually has you doing fence work alone?" There was no judgment in the question, just curiosity, but Katherine felt her defenses rise anyway. "He has 4 sons. They're busy with other things." Yates glanced at her, and in that look she saw understanding. Not pity, which she would have hated, but recognition, like he saw something in her situation that resonated with his own experience. 4 sons, and they send you out here alone in this heat. That doesn't sit right. "It's not your concern," Katherine said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," Yates agreed. "But I'm making it my concern anyway." They continued working, and as the afternoon wore on, Katherine found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't relaxed in years. Yates told her stories about his travels, how he'd worked ranches from Montana to Arizona, always moving, always searching for something he couldn't quite name. He'd lost his parents 3 years back to fever and had been drifting ever since, picking up work where he could find it. "What made you stop here?" Katherine asked, surprised by her own curiosity. She so rarely talked to anyone besides her family, and they certainly never engaged in real conversation with her. "Honestly, I saw you working and something told me to stop." Yates secured another section of wire, then turned to look at her directly. "Call it instinct, but I get feelings about places and people sometimes." This felt important. Katherine's heart did something strange in her chest, a flutter she'd never experienced before. She looked away quickly, focusing on her work. "That's foolish talk. Maybe," Yates said with a slight smile. "But here I am anyway." By the time they finished the fence, the sun was starting its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Katherine gathered her tools, acutely aware that she was going to face her father's wrath for being late with supper preparations. "Thank you for your help," she said formally, though what she wanted to say was, "Please don't go. Please keep talking to me like I'm a person worth knowing." "It was my pleasure, Miss Katherine," Yates said, and the way he said her name made it sound like something precious. "Will you be all right getting back? I've made this walk 1,000 times." "I know, but I'd feel better riding alongside you if you don't mind. Make sure you get home safe." Katherine knew she should refuse. Her father would be impossible if he saw her arriving with a strange man. But she found herself nodding anyway, and Yates smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made something warm bloom in her chest. They walked together across the range, Yates leading his horse and matching his pace to hers. The conversation flowed easier now, and Katherine found herself talking about things she'd never told anyone. How she'd loved to draw when she was younger, but her father had taken away her pencils and paper, calling it a waste of time. How she used to sing while she worked, but had stopped because her brothers mocked her. How sometimes she stood at her bedroom window at night and looked at the stars and dreamed of a different life. "Why don't you leave?" Yates asked gently. "Where would I go? I have no money of my own. My father keeps everything locked up, says women can't be trusted with finances." Katherine laughed bitterly. "Besides, what would I do? I have no skills except work, and no one's going to hire a woman to do ranch work when there are plenty of men available." "You're wrong about that," Yates said firmly. "You've got more skills than half the ranch hands I've worked with, and more determination than all of them combined. Any outfit would be lucky to have you." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had said something kind to her, let alone recognized her worth. "You don't know me well enough to say that. I know what I've seen this afternoon. That's enough." As they crested the final rise before the ranch came into view, Katherine felt panic flutter in her stomach. "You should go now. My father, he won't understand." Yates's expression hardened. "Will he hurt you?" "No, not physically, but he'll make my life harder. And it's already hard enough." Yates studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but I'll be in Elko, at least for a while. If you need anything, anything at all, come find me. I'll probably be at the Silver Dollar Saloon or the livery stable looking for work. I never get into town, Katherine said quietly. Then I'll come back out here. Check on that fence. Make sure it's holding. His eyes met hers. I'm not going to just disappear, Katherine. Not unless you tell me you want me to. She should tell him exactly that, should protect him from getting tangled up in the mess that was her life. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, Be careful. My father doesn't take kindly to strangers hanging around. I'll be careful, Yates promised. You do the same. He mounted his horse then, and with one last look that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words, he turned and rode toward Elko. Katherine stood watching until he disappeared from view, then hurried toward the ranch house, trying to prepare herself for what was coming. Her father was waiting on the porch, his face thunderous. Where have you been? Supper should have been ready an hour ago. The fence was worse than you said. It took longer. Katherine kept her eyes down, moving past him toward the house. Don't you sass me, girl. Get in that kitchen and fix something. Your brothers are half starved. Katherine bit back the response that her brothers could fix their own supper for once in their lives and went inside. As she worked, moving through the familiar motions of preparing a meal, she found her thoughts drifting back to Yates Brennan again and again. The way he'd worked beside her without complaint, the way he'd listened when she talked, really listened like her words mattered, the way he'd looked at her, not through her or past her, but directly at her, seeing Katherine and not just a pair of hands to do labor. Dinner was a tense affair. Her brothers barely acknowledged her as she served them, too busy arguing about a horse race they wanted to attend in town the following week. Her father ate in silence, his disapproval hanging over the table like a storm cloud. Katherine, he said as she was clearing plates, tomorrow you'll need to ride out to the North Range and check the water situation. Creek's been running low, and the cattle need access. Take provisions for the day. Yes, sir, she said automatically, though her heart sank. The North Range was a half-day's ride away, and checking the creek meant potentially digging out the flow or redirecting it, heavy work that would leave her exhausted. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the small room under the eaves, Katherine stared at the ceiling and allowed herself to think about Yates. It was dangerous, she knew. Letting herself hope, letting herself imagine a different life. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, and yet she couldn't stop her mind from wandering down paths she'd never let it explore before. What would it be like to have someone care about whether she was tired or hungry or hurting? What would it be like to have a partner, someone who saw her as an equal rather than a servant? What would it be like to be valued? She fell asleep with these questions spinning through her mind and dreamed of storm gray eyes and a voice that spoke her name like it mattered. The next morning, Katherine was up before dawn, as always. She prepared breakfast for her family, packed provisions for her trip to the North Range, saddled her horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, and was riding out as the sun broke over the mountains. The early morning air was cool, but she knew the heat would be punishing by midday. The ride to the North Range took her across some of the most beautiful country in Nevada, rolling hills studded with sage and the occasional juniper tree, with the Ruby Mountains rising in the distance. Under different circumstances, Katherine might have enjoyed the journey. As it was, she just felt tired. She found the creek around mid-morning and immediately saw the problem. A rock fall had partially dammed the flow, creating a pool that wasn't reaching the lower pastures where the cattle grazed. She'd need to move the rocks and dig out a new channel for the water. Katherine dismounted, tied Daisy in the shade, and got to work. The rocks were heavy, and the sun was climbing fast. She worked steadily, ignoring the protests of her muscles and the sweat that poured down her face. This was her life. This was what she knew. She was knee-deep in the creek, wrestling with a particularly stubborn boulder when she heard hoofbeats again. She looked up, shading her eyes, and her heart leaped when she recognized the paint horse and its rider. Yates dismounted quickly and came to the creek's edge. "Catherine, what are you doing out here alone?" "Working," she said, stating the obvious. "What are you doing here?" "I was riding out to check on that fence we fixed, and I ran into one of your brothers in town this morning. He mentioned you'd been sent to the North Range alone. I didn't like the sound of it." He stepped into the creek without hesitation. "Here, let me help with that rock." Together, they managed to shift the boulder, and the water immediately began flowing more freely. They worked side by side for the next few hours, clearing the blockage and establishing a better channel. Catherine was intensely aware of Yates's presence beside her, the way they moved in sync without needing to discuss their approach, like they'd been working together for years instead of just meeting yesterday. When they finally finished, they sat on the creek bank to rest and eat. Catherine shared her provisions, and Yates produced a canteen of cool water from his saddlebag. "You shouldn't have come," Catherine said, though she was deeply glad he had. "Why not?" "Because I can't—" She struggled for the words. "I can't give you anything. I can't even give myself anything. My life isn't my own." Yates was quiet for a moment, then said, "What if it could be?" Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's a dream, Yates, that's all." "Dreams start somewhere," he said. He turned to face her fully. "Catherine, I know I just met you, and I know I've got no right to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. What your father's doing, what your brothers are letting happen, it's not right. You deserve better. You deserve to be treated like you matter." "And what am I supposed to do about it?" Catherine asked, feeling something close to anger rising in her chest. Not at Yates, but at the situation, at the unfairness of it all. "Run away with no money and no prospects. Throw myself on the charity of strangers." "You could marry," Yates said quietly. Catherine stared at him. "I don't even know you." "I know. But you could get to know me, if you wanted." He took a breath. "I found work at the Anderson Ranch, about 10 miles from here. Good work, decent pay. I've got savings put by. It's not much, but it's enough to start with. I'm saying, if you wanted to leave your father's place, you'd have somewhere to go. Someone who'd make sure you never had to work yourself to exhaustion again. Someone who'd treat you the way you deserve to be treated." Catherine's hands were shaking. This was insane. This was the most reckless thing she'd ever heard. And yet, looking into Yates's earnest face, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she felt something shift inside her chest. Hope, dangerous and bright. "You don't know me," she repeated, but weakly. "Then let me," Yates said. "Let me get to know you. I'll come by when I can, help with your work, so you can have a few minutes to breathe. We'll talk. We'll figure out if this feeling I've got is real or just foolishness. But Catherine, I look at you and I see someone extraordinary, someone strong and capable and deserving of so much more than she's got. I want to be the person who helps you find that more." Catherine closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. She'd cried more in the past 2 days than she had in the past 2 years. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," Yates said gently. "Just think about it. I'm not going anywhere." They rode back toward Foster Ranch together that afternoon, and this time Catherine didn't ask him to leave before they got close. She was too tired to care about her father's reaction, and besides, something had changed in her. Yates's words had planted a seed, and it was growing fast, pushing up through years of resignation and defeat. Her father was indeed furious when he saw them riding in together, but Yates handled it with a calm confidence that Catherine had to admire. "Mr. Foster, sir," Yates said, dismounting and removing his hat respectfully. "Yates Brennan. I happened across your daughter working at the North Range and lent a hand with the creek clearing. Wanted to make sure she got home safely." "My daughter doesn't need help from strangers," George Foster said coldly. "With respect, sir, that job was big enough for 3 men. Your daughter was managing it alone." Yates's voice remained polite, but there was steel underneath. Seemed the Christian thing to do was assist. Catherine watched the interaction, holding her breath. Her father was studying Yates with narrowed eyes, clearly trying to decide if this stranger was a threat or an opportunity. "You looking for work?" George asked finally. "Actually got hired on at Anderson Ranch," Yates replied. "But I appreciate the thought." "Anderson's place." George spat into the dirt. "He's too soft on his hands. You'll probably be looking for something better soon enough." "I don't think so, sir. Tom Anderson strikes me as a fair man, and that's worth more than higher wages." Yates put his hat back on. "I'll be on my way now. Miss Catherine, thank you for sharing your provisions." He mounted his horse and rode off, but not before catching Catherine's eye. In that brief glance, she saw a promise. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." "You're not alone." Over the following weeks, Yates found reasons to be near Foster Ranch with increasing frequency. He'd stop by to check on the fence they'd repaired. He'd be riding past when Catherine was drawing water from the well and would help her carry the heavy buckets. Once he arrived with fresh trout from the creek on Anderson's land and gave them to her for supper, claiming he'd caught more than he could eat. Each visit was brief, carefully timed for when Catherine was working outside, where they could talk without her father overhearing, and each conversation drew them closer together, weaving threads of connection that grew stronger with every word exchanged. Catherine learned that Yates had once wanted to be a teacher, but his family's poverty had made education beyond basic reading and writing impossible. He loved books, though, borrowed them whenever he could, and carried a worn copy of poetry in his saddlebag. He had a gentle sense of humor and a way of seeing the absurdity in difficult situations that made Catherine laugh, really laugh, for the first time in years. Yates learned that Catherine was sharper than most of the educated people he'd met, with a natural curiosity and intelligence that had been systematically suppressed. She remembered everything, from the patterns of weather to the characteristics of different plants to the personalities of animals. She had a gift for understanding living things, for knowing what they needed, and she had a fierce inner strength that took his breath away. "You're remarkable," he told her one evening when they were standing by the horse paddock, ostensibly discussing one of the mares who seemed off her feed. "I'm nothing special," Catherine said automatically. "Stop that," Yates said, not unkindly. "Stop diminishing yourself. You've survived years of treatment that would have broken most people, and you're still standing. You're still kind. You're still capable of hope. That's not nothing, Catherine. That's everything." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something inside her made a decision. "Yates, if you meant what you said before, about marrying—" "I meant it," he said immediately. "Every word. I'd need time to know you better, to be sure. Take all the time you need. But I think—" Catherine took a shaky breath. "I think I want to try. I think I want to see if there's something real between us." The smile that broke across Yates's face was like sunrise. "Can I court you proper, then? The way you deserve? Under my father's nose?" Catherine almost laughed. "He'll never allow it." "Then we'll be creative," Yates said. "I'm patient." "Catherine, I'll wait as long as it takes." Their courtship was unlike any other in Elko's history, conducted in stolen moments and secret meetings. Yates would arrive at the ranch with legitimate reasons to be there, a horse he was considering buying and wanted a second opinion on, news from town that he thought Mr. Foster should know, offers to help with heavy work that needed doing. George Foster tolerated these visits because Yates never asked for payment and always showed proper respect, but Catherine could see her father's suspicion growing. On Sundays, when the Foster family attended church in Elko, Yates would be there too, seated across the aisle, and afterward, he'd manage brief conversations with Catherine under the guise of general socializing. He'd ask her opinion on the sermon, comment on the weather, mention that he'd seen a particularly beautiful sunset the evening before. To anyone listening, it was innocuous small talk, but Catherine heard the real messages underneath. I'm thinking of you. You're beautiful. I care. One Sunday in late September, as the heat was finally breaking and autumn was painting the mountains with gold, Yates managed to draw Catherine away from her family for a few minutes while they milled around outside the church. There's a harvest dance next Saturday, he said quietly. Will your family attend? I doubt my father will let me go, Catherine said. He'll say there's too much work. Try anyway, please. I want to dance with you, Catherine. Just once in front of everyone where I don't have to hide how I feel about you. The longing in his voice matched the longing in her heart. I'll try. She did try, gathering her courage at dinner that evening. Father, about the harvest dance next Saturday. What about it? George looked up from his plate. I was hoping I might attend, just for an hour or two. Catherine kept her voice carefully neutral. You've got work to do. The preserving isn't finished. I could finish it earlier in the week, Catherine said. I've been staying up late the past few nights. I'm ahead of schedule. Her brother James snickered. She probably wants to make eyes at that Brennan fellow who's been sniffing around. Catherine felt her face flush, but kept her expression calm. I just thought it would be nice to attend a social event for once. George studied her, his eyes calculating. You sweet on Brennan? I barely know him, Catherine said, which was both true and completely false. She knew Yates's heart, his dreams, his essential goodness. What she didn't know were the superficial details that most people would consider knowing someone. Good. Keep it that way. He's not for you. Who is for me, then? The words slipped out before Catherine could stop them. Or am I just supposed to stay here forever, working myself to death while my brothers sit around drinking? The silence that fell over the table was deafening. Her brothers stared at her in shock. They'd never heard her speak back before. George Foster's face went dark red. You'll watch your mouth, girl. I've given you a roof over your head and food in your belly. You owe me respect and obedience. I've given you 23 years of unpaid labor, Catherine said, and now that she'd started, she couldn't seem to stop. I've done the work of 3 ranch hands while my brothers do nothing. I think I've more than paid for my roof and food. Get to your room, George said, his voice dangerously quiet. Now. Catherine stood, her legs shaking, but her head high. As she left, she heard her father say, No dance for her. She can think about her attitude while she scrubs every floor in this house. In her room, Catherine sat on her bed and waited for the tears to come. Instead, she felt a strange lightness. She'd spoken the truth out loud for the first time in her life, and the sky hadn't fallen. Her father was angry, but he was always angry. At least now he was angry because she defended herself. The next day, Catherine was hauling laundry water when Yates appeared, having apparently developed a sixth sense for when she needed him most. I can't go to the dance, she told him without preamble. I spoke back to my father and now I'm being punished. Instead of disappointment, Yates's face showed something like pride. You stood up for yourself? For all the good it did me. Catherine, that's everything. That's the first step. He glanced around to make sure they were alone, then stepped closer. Listen, I've been thinking. Maybe we've been going about this the wrong way. Maybe we don't need your father's permission. What do you mean? I mean, you're 23 years old. You're old enough to make your own choices. If you wanted to leave, he couldn't legally stop you. Catherine's heart began to pound. You mean just go? I mean, marry me, Yates said. Not someday, not eventually. Now, this week. We can go to the Justice of the Peace in Elko, make it legal, and then you'd be my wife. You'd come home with me to the little cabin Tom Anderson's letting me use. You'd be free. Catherine. He'd come after us, my father. He'd never allow it. He'd have no legal standing. You'd be my wife, and there's nothing he could do about it. Yates took her hand, his thumb brushing across her work-roughened knuckles. I know it's fast. I know we're supposed to have a long courtship and do things proper. But Catherine, I love you. I've loved you since the moment I saw you fighting with that fence post in the blazing heat, too stubborn to quit. And I think maybe you might love me too. Catherine looked at their joined hands, then up into his face. Did she love him? She thought about how her heart lifted every time she saw him riding up, how his voice soothed something inside her that had been raw and wounded for years, how she felt like herself, like the person she was meant to be when they talked, how the thought of a future without him felt like staring into darkness, while the thought of a future with him felt like finally seeing sunlight. I do, she whispered. I do love you. Yates's expression transformed with joy. Then marry me tomorrow if you're willing. I have Saturday off. We can ride into Elko together, stand before the justice, and become husband and wife. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to work yourself to exhaustion again, making sure you're cherished and valued and loved the way you deserve. Tomorrow, Catherine repeated, testing the word. It seemed impossible, too fast, too reckless. And yet what was she waiting for? Permission from her father that would never come? A perfect moment that didn't exist? She'd been cautious and obedient her whole life, and where had it gotten her? Yes, she said, and felt something like wings unfurling in her chest. Yes, I'll marry you tomorrow. They made their plans quickly, in whispered voices. Catherine would pack what few belongings she could claim as her own and hide them in the barn. The next morning, Saturday, she'd tell her father she was riding to check on the south pasture fences. Instead, she'd meet Yates on the road to Elko. They'd go to town, marry, and by the time her father discovered she was gone, it would be too late. That night, Catherine lay in bed and tried to comprehend what she was about to do. Terror and exhilaration warred inside her. She was leaving the only home she'd ever known, defying her father in the most fundamental way possible, tying her life to a man she'd known for only a few months. It was madness. It was also the sanest thing she'd ever done. She rose before dawn, as usual, and went through the motions of preparing breakfast. Her hands were steady as she fried eggs and bacon, made coffee, sliced bread. Her brothers stumbled in one by one, barely acknowledging her. Her father ate in silence, reading a week-old newspaper from town. I'm riding out to check the south pasture, Catherine said as she cleared the breakfast dishes. Might take most of the day. Fine, her father said without looking up. Be back in time to fix supper. Catherine went to the barn, saddled Daisy, and tied her small bundle of belongings behind the saddle. Her mother's wedding ring, which she'd hidden away years ago. The one dress that was hers and not a hand-me-down. A brush, a few undergarments, a photograph of her mother. That was the sum total of her possessions after 23 years of life. She rode away from Foster Ranch and didn't look back. Yates was waiting where he'd promised, at the big cottonwood tree where the ranch road met the main route to Elko. When he saw her coming, he broke into a smile that made her heart soar. You came, he said, as if he'd doubt it. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might be too sensible to run off with a cowboy you barely know. Catherine brought Daisy alongside his paint horse. Maybe I'm tired of being sensible. Maybe I'm ready to be happy instead. They rode toward Elko side by side, and with each mile, Catherine felt the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. The morning was beautiful, cool and clear, with the mountains standing sharp against the blue sky. Yates pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the region, and made her laugh with observations about the people they might encounter in town. Are you nervous? He asked as they neared Elko. Terrified, Catherine admitted. But not about marrying you, about what comes after. My father, he won't take this well. I'll handle your father, Yates said firmly. And Tom Anderson knows the situation. He's a good man, and he won't let anyone cause trouble on his land. We'll be safe, Catherine. I promise you that. The justice of the peace was a thin man named Harold Pritchard, who operated out of a small office next to the general store. He looked surprised when Yates and Catherine walked in together, but he asked no questions beyond the necessary ones to complete the legal paperwork. Do you, Yates Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Yates said, his voice strong and sure. And do you, Katherine Foster, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Catherine looked at Yates, at this good man who'd seen her worth when no one else had, who'd offered her a future when she'd thought she had none, and said, I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Yates cupped Catherine's face gently in his hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Catherine's first kiss, and she felt it all the way to her toes, a warmth that spread through her entire body. Hello, Mrs. Brennan, Yates murmured against her lips. Hello, husband, Catherine replied, and felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, a luxury Catherine had never experienced. Yates ordered her whatever she wanted, and she felt self-conscious about her work, worn hands and faded dress surrounded by the relative finery of the other diners. But Yates looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and gradually she relaxed. We should probably head to Anderson's place, Yates said eventually. Get you settled before your father realizes you're not coming back. The Anderson Ranch was larger and more prosperous than Foster Ranch, with well-maintained buildings and clear signs of careful management. Tom Anderson himself came out to meet them, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. So this is your bride, he said, smiling at Catherine. Welcome, Mrs. Brennan. Yates has told me a bit about your situation. You'll be safe here, I promise you that. Thank you, sir, Catherine said. I appreciate your kindness. No thanks necessary. I don't hold with men who treat their children like unpaid servants, especially daughters. Tom clapped Yates on the shoulder. Show your wife to your cabin. I'll have my wife send over some supplies to help you get started. The cabin was small but sturdy, one room with a loft for sleeping, a stone fireplace, and a tiny kitchen area. To Catherine, who'd been living in a cramped room under the eaves, it looked like paradise. It's not much, Yates said, suddenly uncertain. But it's ours, and I'm saving money. Eventually, we'll have our own place. Something bigger. It's perfect, Catherine said, and meant it. She set down her bundle and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. It's absolutely perfect. They spent the afternoon making the cabin feel like home. Mrs. Anderson, a plump woman named Sarah, came by with fresh linens, some basic food supplies, and a vase of wildflowers that brought tears to Catherine's eyes. Every home needs flowers, Sarah said kindly. You let me know if you need anything, dear. I'm glad to have another woman nearby. As the sun began to set, Catherine found herself standing at the cabin's single window, looking out at the mountains. Yates came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Having second thoughts? He asked quietly. No, Catherine said, leaning back against his solid warmth. I'm having first thoughts. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking about what I want, what makes me happy. It's strange. You'll get used to it, Yates promised. Starting tomorrow, your only job is to rest and recover. I want you to sleep late, eat when you're hungry, and do absolutely nothing that you don't want to do. Catherine turned in his arms. I don't know how to do nothing. Then I'll teach you. He kissed her forehead. You've earned rest, Catherine. Years of it. Let me give that to you. That night, in the loft of their cabin, Yates made love to his wife with gentleness and patience, teaching her that physical touch could be tender and joyful rather than just another burden. Catherine discovered sensations she'd never imagined, a pleasure that left her breathless and amazed. Afterward, she lay in Yates's arms, listening to his heartbeat, and felt something inside her that had been tight and closed for years finally begin to open. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Yates replied, holding her closer. Forever, Catherine. That's my promise. The storm came the next afternoon. Catherine and Yates were working in the small garden plot behind the cabin, Yates showing Catherine how to plant the herbs that Sarah had given them. When they heard hoofbeats approaching fast, Catherine's stomach dropped when she saw her father riding up, her four brothers flanking him. Yates stood immediately, placing himself between Catherine and the approaching men. "Mr. Foster," he said calmly, "can I help you?" "You can return my daughter," George Foster snarled, dismounting. "Catherine, get on your horse. You're coming home." "No, sir, I'm not," Catherine said, standing beside Yates. Her voice shook but didn't break. "I'm married now. This is my home. That marriage isn't legal. You're not of age. I'm 23, Father. I'm well past the age of consent. You had no right to marry without my permission." "Actually, she had every right," Tom Anderson said, emerging from the main ranch house with two of his hands. "The law's clear on that, George. Your daughter is an adult, and she's made her choice." George Foster's face was apoplectic with rage. "She's been bewitched by this drifter. He's using her. The only person who's been using her is you," Yates said, his voice hard. "Catherine told me how you've worked her like a slave for years while your sons did nothing. That ends now. She's my wife, and I'll protect her, even if it's from her own family." "You've got no idea what you're talking about, boy. I raised her, fed her, clothed her, and she repaid you 1,000 times over with her labor." Yates shot back. "She doesn't owe you anything more." George turned to Catherine, and for a moment she saw something that might have been hurt beneath his anger. "Is this really what you want? To throw away your family for a man you barely know?" Catherine took a deep breath. "What I want is to be valued, to be treated like my work matters, like I matter. Yates gives me that. You never did. I gave you purpose, structure. You gave me exhaustion and loneliness." Catherine felt tears on her cheeks, but kept talking. "I loved you, Father. I wanted so badly for you to see me, to appreciate what I did, to tell me just once that I was enough, but you never did. So yes, I'm choosing a man who sees my worth over a family that never has." The silence that followed was profound. Catherine's brothers looked uncomfortable, shifting in their saddles. Even George seemed at a loss for words. Finally, Tom Anderson spoke. "I think it's time for you to leave, George. Your daughter's made her choice, and it's a legal one. If you continue to harass her or her husband, I'll have the sheriff involved." George Foster looked at Catherine one last time, his expression unreadable. Then he mounted his horse. "Don't come crying back when you realize what you've done," he said. "My door won't be open." "I know," Catherine said quietly. "Goodbye, Father." She watched them ride away, and when they disappeared over the hill, she felt Yates's arms come around her. She leaned into his strength and finally let herself cry, not just for what she'd lost, but for what she'd never had in the first place. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Catherine discovered what it meant to wake naturally, without the pressure of endless chores looming. Yates insisted she spend her mornings doing whatever she wanted, whether that was reading books borrowed from the Andersons' extensive library, working in her garden, or simply sitting in the sun. He brought her pencils and paper, and she began drawing again, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. "These are beautiful," Yates said one evening, looking through her sketches of the mountains and wildlife. "You have real talent, Catherine." "They're just scribbles," she said automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, thank you. I enjoy it." "Don't diminish yourself," Yates reminded her gently. "That's an old habit you don't need anymore." He was patient as Catherine slowly learned to accept care and kindness. When he came home from a long day working the Anderson cattle, he'd insist on cooking supper together, treating it as a shared activity rather than her sole responsibility. He asked her opinion on everything from how to arrange their furniture to which calves showed the most promise. He made her feel like a partner, not a servant. Their physical intimacy deepened too, as Catherine grew more comfortable with pleasure and her own desires. Yates was an attentive lover, always making sure she enjoyed their encounters as much as he did. He'd whisper words of love and appreciation while he touched her, telling her how beautiful she was, how much he desired her, how lucky he felt to be her husband. One evening in November, as they lay tangled together after making love, Catherine said, "I never knew it could be like this." "Like what?" Yates asked, stroking her hair. "Easy, happy, like I'm allowed to just exist without constantly proving my worth through labor." "You never had to prove your worth, Catherine. You've always had value just by being who you are." He kissed her temple. "But I'm glad I get to be the one to show you that." As autumn turned to winter, Catherine began helping Sarah Anderson with various projects around the main ranch house. Unlike her father, Sarah paid her for her time and treated her like a skilled worker rather than a drudge. Catherine found she actually enjoyed work when it was appreciated and fairly compensated. She made friends with the other ranch wives in the area, women who welcomed her into their circle and taught her that female friendship could be a source of strength and joy. Christmas arrived, and Catherine experienced her first truly happy holiday. Yates carved her a beautiful wooden box for her art supplies, and she knitted him a thick scarf in rich blue wool. They attended the community Christmas party in Elko, and Catherine danced in public for the first time in her life, whirling around the floor in Yates's arms while everyone watched and smiled. "You're a natural dancer," Yates told her, spinning her under his arm. "I'm just happy," Catherine replied, laughing. "That makes everything feel natural." As the new year of 1884 began, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but when she missed her courses for the second month and started experiencing morning sickness, she knew for certain. She was nervous to tell Yates, worried he might see it as too soon, as a burden when they were still establishing their life together. Instead, when she told him, he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "Catherine, we're going to have a baby. You're happy?" she asked, still uncertain. "Happy?" "I'm ecstatic. You're giving me a family, Catherine, a real family built on love instead of obligation." He set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. "But you need to rest more now. No heavy lifting, and you should let Sarah know so she doesn't have you doing anything strenuous." "I'm pregnant, not fragile," Catherine said, but she was smiling. The fact that his first thought was her well-being, her comfort, still amazed her. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Catherine bloomed, her body finally healthy from regular meals and adequate rest. Yates doted on her shamelessly, bringing her treats from town, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, and talking to her growing belly about all the things he wanted to teach their child. "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Catherine asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I'm hoping for healthy," Yates said. "Beyond that, I don't care, though I'll admit, the idea of a little girl with your eyes and your stubbornness appeals to me, or a boy with your kindness and your strength. Either way, we'll love them." Yates took her hand. "And Catherine, I want you to know something. Our children will never be worked the way you were. Boy or girl, they'll have chores appropriate to their age, but they'll also have time to be children, time to play, to learn, to dream. That's my promise to you and to them." In late August, after a long labor attended by Sarah Anderson and the doctor from Elko, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Robert, after Yates's father, and the moment the doctor placed the tiny, squalling infant in her arms, Catherine felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. "He's perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she counted his tiny fingers and toes. "Just like his mother," Yates said, his own eyes wet as he looked at his wife and son. "Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for this gift." The early months of motherhood were exhausting but joyful. Yates took time off from ranch work to help with the baby, changing diapers and walking the floor with Robert when he was fussy. He never once suggested that caring for their child was solely Catherine's responsibility, and he seemed to delight in every aspect of fatherhood, from the messy to the mundane. When Robert was 3 months old, Catherine received an unexpected visit. She was nursing the baby in the cabin when she heard a knock at the door. Opening it, she found her youngest brother, William, standing on the step, hat in hand. "Catherine," he said awkwardly, "can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped back. "Of course." William entered and looked around the small cabin, his eyes landing on the baby in Catherine's arms. "He's yours?" "His name is Robert, my son." Catherine kept her voice neutral, unsure what her brother wanted. "He's beautiful." William sat down heavily at the table. "Catherine, I came to apologize. What father did to you, what we all let happen, it was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I was too much of a coward to say anything." Catherine was so surprised she nearly dropped the baby. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I got married last month. To Mary Sullivan, you remember her from town? And she asked me about you, about why you weren't at the wedding. When I told her what happened, she lit into me like nothing I've ever experienced, made me see what I should have seen all along, that we treated you shamefully." "And father? How does he feel?" "Father won't talk about you, but he's different now, quieter. I think he knows he was wrong, but he's too proud to admit it." William looked at her directly. "I'm sorry, Catherine, for all of it. You deserved so much better from us." Catherine felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of resentment she'd been carrying. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. Can we stay in touch? Mary would like to meet you, and maybe meet your husband and the baby." "I'd like that," Catherine said, and realized she meant it. "But William, I need you to understand. I have a new family now. Yates and Robert, they're my priority. I can't go back to how things were." "I wouldn't ask you to," William said quickly. "I just want a chance to be a better brother than I was, if you'll let me." After William left, Catherine told Yates about the conversation. He listened carefully, then said, "What do you want to do? I'll support whatever you decide." "I think I want to try," Catherine said slowly. "Not to rebuild what we had, because that wasn't worth rebuilding, but maybe to build something new, something healthier." Over the following year, Catherine cautiously reconnected with William and his wife Mary, who turned out to be a firecracker of a woman who reminded Catherine a bit of herself. The two became friends, and through Mary, Catherine was able to establish civil relationships with her other brothers as well. Her father remained distant and proud, never quite able to apologize, but he softened enough to acknowledge her when they crossed paths in town. Catherine found she didn't need his apology as much as she'd once thought she would. She had built a life she loved, with a man who cherished her and a son who was growing more remarkable every day. The validation she'd sought from her father for so many years turned out to be less important than the validation she gave herself. As Robert grew from baby to toddler, Catherine and Yates fell into a comfortable rhythm. Yates continued working at Anderson Ranch, and his dedication earned him a promotion to foreman. The increased wages allowed them to start saving seriously for their own place. Catherine took in sewing and sold her drawings to the general store, which framed and sold them to tourists passing through Elko. She discovered she had a good head for business and enjoyed the independence of earning her own money. When Robert was 2 years old, Tom Anderson approached Yates with an offer. "I'm getting older, and I've been thinking about the future of this ranch. I've got no children of my own, and Sarah and I have talked about it. We'd like to sell you a parcel of land at the western edge of the property, 100 acres with good water and grazing. We'll give you favorable terms, and you can build your own place. You've earned it, Yates." Yates was speechless. He came home that evening and swept Catherine into his arms, spinning her around just like he had when she'd told him about the pregnancy. "We're going to have our own ranch," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our own land, Catherine. A place to raise Robert and any other children we might have." "Other children?" Catherine asked, smiling. "Are you hinting at something, Mr. Brennan?" "Maybe. Yates admitted, setting her down and pulling her close. I love being Robert's father. I'd love to do it again, if you're willing. I'm willing, Katherine said, kissing him. I'm very willing. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma, arrived the following spring. Unlike her brother's birth, Emma came quickly and easily, as if eager to join the family. She had Catherine's green eyes and Yates's dark curls, and she was stubborn from her first breath. She's going to be a handful, the doctor predicted, and he was right. But she was also joyful and loving and fiercely protective of her older brother. Katherine watched her two children play together and marveled at how different their childhoods were from her own. Robert and Emma had chores, yes, but they also had time for imagination and exploration. They had parents who praised their efforts and comforted their hurts. They had security and love in abundance. By the time Emma was 1, construction had begun on the Brennan ranch house. It wasn't a mansion, but it was solid and spacious, with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Yates built it with his own hands, with help from Tom Anderson and some of the other ranch hands, and every nail he drove was driven with thoughts of his family's future. The day they moved into their new house, Katherine stood in the empty parlor and cried. What's wrong? Yates asked, immediately concerned. Nothing's wrong, Katherine said, wiping her eyes. Everything's right. I just keep thinking about that girl I used to be, working herself to death on her father's ranch, never dreaming she could have something like this. And now here I am in my own house with a husband who loves me and 2 beautiful children. It feels like a miracle. You're the miracle, Yates said, pulling her close. You survived everything that was meant to break you, and you came out stronger and kinder on the other side. This house, this ranch, this family, you've earned all of it, Katherine. The years flowed by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing family. A 3rd child arrived, another boy they named Thomas, and then 2 years later, a 2nd daughter, Alice. Their 4 children filled the house with noise and laughter and occasional chaos, and Katherine loved every moment of it. She taught her daughters to be strong and independent, to value their own worth, and never accept less than they deserved. She taught her sons to be gentle and respectful, to see women as equals and partners. And she and Yates worked side by side, building their ranch into one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Katherine never stopped drawing. Her art evolved from simple sketches to detailed paintings that captured the beauty and hardship of life in Nevada. A gallery in San Francisco discovered her work and began representing her, and soon Katherine Foster Brennan was known throughout the West as a talented artist. The money from her paintings helped fund improvements to the ranch and secured their children's futures. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Katherine back to the place where they'd first met, the south pasture, where she'd been repairing that fence alone in the blazing heat. The fence was long since replaced, but the spot remained the same, overlooking miles of rolling Nevada landscape. You know what I remember most about that day? Yates asked, holding Katherine's hand. The way you looked at me when I offered to help. Like you couldn't quite believe someone would do something kind without expecting something in return. I'd never experienced kindness like that before, Katherine said. You changed my life that day, Yates. We changed each other's lives, he corrected. I was drifting before I met you, Katherine. No real purpose beyond the next paycheck, the next town. You gave me something to work for, something to believe in. You made me want to be the best version of myself. Katherine turned to face him fully. I was dying before you came along. Not physically, but inside, where it matters. You saved me, Yates. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, and you offered me a life I didn't dare dream of. Every single day, I'm grateful for that. They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains. 2 people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from their love. When Katherine's father died in 1895, she attended his funeral with mixed emotions. She'd seen him occasionally over the years, brief encounters in town where they'd exchange polite greetings, but never anything deeper. He'd met his grandchildren once or twice, awkward visits where George Foster had seemed unsure how to interact with the confident, successful woman his daughter had become. At the funeral, her brothers came to her one by one, offering condolences and attempting conversations that might heal old wounds. Catherine was kind but distant. She'd forgiven them mostly, but forgiveness didn't require intimacy. She had her own family now, her own life, and while she bore her brothers no ill will, she also felt no need to force a closeness that had never naturally existed. "Do you have any regrets?" Yates asked her that evening as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Robert was 15 now, already nearly as tall as his father. Emma was 13 and showing signs of her mother's artistic talent. Thomas was 11 and obsessed with horses. Alice was 9 and determined to learn everything about running a ranch. "About leaving?" "No," Catherine said firmly. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day, if you'd just ridden past. But I can't regret the choice I made. It gave me you, our children, this life. How could I regret any of that?" "Good," Yates said, pulling her close, "because I thank God every day that I listened to my instinct and stopped to help a beautiful woman fighting with a fence post." As their children grew and eventually started families of their own, Catherine and Yates became the kind of grandparents who were deeply involved but never intrusive, offering wisdom when asked and support when needed. Robert took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, proving himself a capable manager. Emma moved to San Francisco to pursue her art, regularly returning home with stories of the wider world. Thomas started a horse breeding program that became renowned throughout Nevada. Alice married a lawyer and became active in the women's suffrage movement, fighting for causes her mother had never even dared to dream about. "We did good," Yates said one evening, as they sat on their porch, now both in their 60s, watching yet another Nevada sunset. "Look at them, Catherine. Look at what we built." "We did very good," Catherine agreed, lacing her fingers through his. His hair was silver now, and time had carved lines into his face. But to her, he was still the young cowboy who'd stopped to help a stranger in need. "Thank you for giving me this life, Yates." "Thank you for trusting me enough to take a chance," he replied. "Best decision I ever made was helping you with that fence. Best decision I ever made was saying yes when you asked me to marry you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Inside the house, they could hear their daughter Alice and her family who were visiting, the sound of grandchildren laughing and playing. The Brennan Ranch stretched out around them, acres of productive land that represented decades of hard work and partnership. Catherine thought about the girl she'd been, beaten down by endless labor and lack of recognition, convinced she had no value beyond what she could produce through work. She thought about the woman she'd become, confident and successful and deeply loved. The journey between those two versions of herself had been shorter in miles than it seemed, but infinite in transformation. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, as attuned to her moods as ever. "How one person can change everything," Catherine said. "One person, seeing you, really seeing you, can alter the entire course of your life." "Works both ways," Yates said. "You changed me just as much as I changed you." "We saved each other," Catherine said. "Yes," Yates agreed, kissing her temple. "Yes, we did." As twilight settled over the ranch, they remained on the porch, two people who'd found each other in the harsh landscape of the Old West and built something gentle and lasting from their unlikely meeting. Katherine Foster Brennan, who'd once believed she would work herself to death without ever knowing real happiness, had instead discovered love, partnership, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. And it had all started with a cowboy who stopped to help a woman repair a fence because he believed she deserved better than the cards life had dealt her. In choosing to be kind, Yates had given Catherine the courage to choose herself. And in choosing each other, they'd created something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love and respect and the radical belief that everyone deserves rest, recognition, and the chance to be cherished. The stars began to emerge overhead, thousands of pinpoints of light in the vast Nevada sky, and Catherine squeezed her husband's hand. After all these years, after all the joys and challenges and ordinary miracles of their life together, she still felt that flutter in her chest when he was near, that sense of coming home that had nothing to do with buildings or land and everything to do with the man beside her. "I love you," she said, words she'd spoken thousands of times, but that never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Yates replied, words he'd spoken just as often and meant just as deeply, today, tomorrow, and every day after. "That's my promise, Catherine, forever." And in the gathering darkness of a Nevada evening, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and their love, Katherine Foster Brennan rested at last, safe in the knowledge that she was valued, cherished, and finally, beautifully, completely free.